Hey everyone, this is Sean Manaher here with the author Hangout, here with a very special guest today, Joanna Penn from the Creative Penn. Joanna, nice to see you here.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great to be on the show.
And we're actually here with also co-host RJ Adams. How you doing, RJ?
Hey guys.
So we're actually going to get started right away, and really excited to have Joanna Penn on the show. So Joanna, while I'm sure that many of our listeners actually know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about you and maybe something people don't know?
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm a thriller author. I write thrillers under J.F. Penn, and I write non-fiction under Joanna Penn. And I'm a podcaster like yourselves, and a blogger, a professional speaker, and an entrepreneur. But 3 years, I left my job. It's actually my anniversary pretty much today. 3 years as a full-time author entrepreneur. So that's pretty cool. But before that, I spent 13 years as a IT consultant specializing in financial systems, which I love to tell people because, it just was the least creative job possible. And now I just blow people up in my books and stuff, which is fun. Obviously, I spent years thinking about it. And I also have a master's degree in theology, which not marketing. So I like to talk about that too, because it's kind of different. So that might be something people don't know. The other thing is that I'm actually really blind. I wear contact lenses, so at night time I wear glasses. I have the proper librarian pair of glasses going on.
That's great. That's great. And so on your author website, thecreativepen.com, you write, I love reading and always dreamed of writing my own books, but I spent many years thinking about it before I actually took the plunge. My question would be, what made you finally decide to say, I'm gonna be an author?
Well, it wasn't so much that. It was that I was so miserable in my job. I mean, I did that classic thing of, I fell into the job after university to pay off my student debt. Because I went to Oxford, I got recruited into a really great consulting firm, thinking it would just be a couple of years. And time passed, as it always does. And I kept resigning and traveling, trying to find myself. But then I'd have to go back to the job. And I tried starting other businesses. I tried doing so many things, but I was never happy. And then one day I just was like, I started to read a lot of self-help books, and I decided to write my own self-help book to help myself. And the first iteration of that was called How to Enjoy Your Job, because I could not understand why I was unhappy. I mean, I had a great consulting job, good money, was traveling, I was living in New Zealand and then Australia. I had a house, I had all the things you're meant to want in your life, and I was miserable. So I wrote this book. I started writing this book for myself so I could learn how to enjoy my job. And amusingly, out of that, I learned about self-publishing, I learned about marketing and blogging, started blogging, and discovered that actually I wanted to be a writer. So I almost didn't decide it. Well, I've been a big reader all my life, so I always wanted to, but I never thought it could be a job. Like, I'm still massively surprised that I'm here. But it's just a little bit over time. But I mean, that book doesn't even exist anymore. I rewrote it. It's now called Career Change. I rewrote it after I left my job. But it turns out that the book, often the book you want to write is the book that will change your own life. And that's a pretty important thing.
And I find that a lot of authors coming out of the corporate world in IT, they take a different approach to writing books in than the traditional sense. And it really seems like you've taken your career as an author and really applied business principles to it as well.
Yeah, and as a consultant as well, I think my kind of natural tendency is to learn everything I can about stuff and then put it into practice. And so I've been writing, so like I've written How to Market a Book based on years of learning about book marketing. Like I say, I don't have a degree in book marketing, I just learned it, and then I want to write about it. And you're right. However, I feel this with fiction very much. It's taken me really up until my book Desecration, I think, to find my voice, which is something that everyone talks about with fiction and nobody really understands until you actually find it. And I think the problem with when you are overeducated, so now I call myself overeducated because I have too many degrees and things, you overanalyze things, you over-consult on things, and so realistically I have to shut down this big critical side of my head when I want to write fiction, and it's something I'm exploring at the moment. It's something that I'm really just coming to grips with, is how do I turn that side of me off so that I can write what's really inside of me, which is actually quite dark and twisty.
With theology too, so this should be interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny because with Desecration and Delirium, my last two books, I tried to write straight crime novels, and it was like, I'm just not going to do anything supernatural. It's just going to be straight crime. And then the character that appears to me is a psychic, so I have a psychic. And then in Delirium, I end up with a whole load of demons, and I'm like, I can't stop the demons coming out in my books. So now I'm trying to embrace that supernatural side of my interest.
Yeah. And when I was researching a bit more to really understand who Joanna Penn was and is, I went way back, and your first YouTube video you ever produced.
Oh,
you
no.
you actually did a book review from Jack Canfield's book, The Success Principles, and you mentioned you really liked his focus on I want list, where you pick 30 things you want to have, to do before you die. And my question would be is, how has this book, as well as I assume you created your own list, how has that been instrumental in you becoming a best-selling author?
That's so funny. I haven't watched that video for a long time because what's interesting about it as well is you can see how much my comfort level with video has changed, right? It's the great video to watch when people say, oh, I could never do what you do on video, like be just yourself. I'm like, go watch that one. I think that was 2008. But yeah, that book, actually, I really rate that book, The Success Principles by Jack Canfield, and the tagline of that is how to get from where you are to where you want to be. So I can't remember that particular exercise, but that book, at the very, like, either principle 1 or 2, it's take 100% responsibility for your life. Now, I was at the point in my life where I was going, okay, so I'm a successful consultant. How did I get here? And then this book kind of made me confront the fact that I got there because every choice I made had led me to that moment. And I hadn't made choices that would change my direction. So what I ended up doing was going, what choices do I need to make to change direction? So one of the big changes I made in my life was I went 4 days a week at work in order to write that first book. So I gave up essentially 20% of my income in order to make space for something else. And sometimes we have to make space for something else in order for that something else to arrive. Often there's no time in our lives for, coming up with new ideas or changing things. So that book, I reread it sometimes, actually, and I recommend it to everyone. It really helped me at a time when I just didn't know what to do. But that how to get from where you are to where you want to be is also instrumental, because if you don't know where you want to be, you can't make the choices to get there. And but I now think of this, and I talk about this as a ski slope, in that even if you know you want to get to the bottom of the hill, or say you want to be a best-selling author and that's your job, you can't just go from A to B straight down the hill. You actually have to zigzag along the way. So I started out writing non-fiction, I started out blogging, I've moved into podcasting, I moved into fiction, I moved into speaking. You don't really know until you get moving where, the route that it's going to take.
And with everything that you've done, what's the next evolution for what you're looking to do and master? It seems like each thing that you've tackled and you said, hey, I'm going to try this, maybe not be amazing at it initially, but it seems like what you've done is kind of taken something, mastered it, go on to the next thing. What are you working on right now?
It's great you say that, and that I've got a post coming up on my site which is about my 3-year anniversary as the author entrepreneur. And what I say in that is there's a quote by T.S. Eliot about, at the end of all our travels, we find ourselves at the beginning again, something like that. I can't remember the exact quote, but essentially where I'm focusing for my next iteration. So I've just finished this book, Business for Authors, How to Be an Author Entrepreneur, and I feel, and the one before that was about public speaking for authors, creatives, and other introverts, and then there was the marketing book. And I kind of feel like you're exactly right. What I've done is reach the end, not the end, of course, we're always learning, but I feel like, okay, I understand what my job is now. My job as an author entrepreneur is all of these things. And what I've returned to is where I was a few years ago, which is focusing on creativity. So as I just said, what I want to learn next is how to turn off the analytical side of my head until I'm in the editing phase. I want to learn how to be more productive with my fiction. There are some amazing authors right now who are, and I hate the phrase churning it out, because they're not churning it out, but they write very fast. And I think that's what I want to learn to do, because I feel like that's the only way to turn off the analytical side of my head. So yeah, that's my next focus, is really going to be back to basics, back to fiction, back to productivity, creativity. Yeah.
Very
Right.
cool.
Let's look back. You've been pretty successful, like Sean said, in a lot of the things you've tackled. What are some of the failures you've experienced in your journey, and how have you dealt with that emotional impact from that?
Yeah, well, I've failed a lot. This is another blog post I have in draft, is all my failures. Because I'm one of those people who believes that failure is important and we learn from it and everything. But I've had some big ones, like when I tried to start doing other businesses. I started a scuba diving business in New Zealand, which just had so many issues with it. I mean, the price of petrol would be one big issue, plus, employees and insurance and marketing for luxury scuba diving, the weather, I mean, talk about business models. Being an author, it's so much better. But so that business failed. I did property investment, that failed. My first marriage failed. We learn things from each of these experiences. Now, in terms of being an author, when I did that first book, How to Enjoy Your Job, this was before the Kindle, 2007, 2008, just as the Kindle started in America, but I was in Australia. So I printed 2,000 copies of that book and had them in my house. And so, of course, that cost me probably around 6,000 Aussie dollars. And, of course, then I realized that I didn't know how to sell them, which was the thing that started my marketing journey. So, I mean, that was a big mistake. So since then, I've really learned, doing things digitally, print on demand. There's another video that I did, which is like how print on demand can change your life. So you don't have to warehouse books and have them in your house. Other failures, there's just so many. I mean, I feel now that actually this is another thing I'm looking at, is risk. I've just reading a book called Little Bets, about trying more risky stuff and seeing what happens. And I think this is part of creativity. Creatives should take more risks and not be afraid of failure. So this is something I really want to try and investigate, and try and write some books that are more edgy and less acceptable, perhaps, or less acceptable to me as somebody whose mother was an English literature teacher. And who went to Oxford and who got told the only good books are sort of 500 years old. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah, and the fact is that you failed because you tried, and if you didn't try, you wouldn't fail, but then you wouldn't have success, right, at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, what I like about the whole startup movement, that's kind of going on now, is that whole attitude is so important. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. So yeah, I feel that's really important. I mean, just talking about blogging, The Creative Pen was my third blog. The two before that fell by the wayside. I started, since the Creative Pen started, I started another two, of which another one fell by the wayside. These are things that we keep. I didn't know about blogging. You start a blog when you don't understand blogging. But yeah, so things change over time, but you've got to keep trying, and it's fun, right? I mean, it's fun to give things a try.
So with that, in knowing that it's not an easy road for self-published authors, or any author for that matter, what is the mindset that authors need to have to be a successful author?
I think one of the biggest things is this long-term view that is really missing, I think, for a lot of people. There's this myth in the publishing industry that you write a book and you make $1 million and that's it, you can retire. Ta-da! But actually that is a real myth. I mean, that rarely happens. Often the people whose first book does make them $1 million, it's not their first book anyway. They've got loads of books in a drawer, or they were a screenwriter. Lee Child, perfect example. First book, Jack Reacher book, makes him loads of money, and that's it. That's all he needs to write now. And I love Jack Reacher, but the fact is, Lee Child was in TV producer for like 30 years. So he had, story had become part of his consciousness before he started writing. So for the rest of us, this long-term view is so critical, because writing is one of these brilliant careers you can do until the day you die. So, and each of those books, fiction in particular, can earn you money until the day you die. It just keeps on earning. If you keep appearing in people's consciousness, they can find your books. You don't have to. They don't have to have just come out, especially with fiction, because it doesn't age. So, yeah, I think. Oh, I've totally forgotten the question now.
That's all right. Hey, I do the same thing.
Oh, the long-term. Yeah, sorry. What the mindset people need to have? Yeah. The long-term thinking. There's another podcast I've just started listening to called the Long Now Foundation. Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm.
That's really cool. They've got a 10,000-year clock. So they look at things on a much bigger scale of human kind of consciousness, and I love that. And I mean, for authors, I talk about the Olympic period, as in every Olympics is every 4 years, right? The big Olympics every 4 years. Between when I got married in 2008, during the 2008 Olympics, and I was an IT consultant. I had no books, I had no blog, I had no audience, I had no nothing. 4 years later, at the London Olympics, I was living on the other side of the world as a full-time author entrepreneur. I had books, I had an audience. My whole life had changed in 4 years. So I urge people to think in that 4-year period of decide what you want, actually act. Don't just do all that law of attraction stuff. Like, you actually have to do something, but then think about a 4-year period and how much you can achieve in 4 years. Because 1 year is never enough, right? It's September already. How did that happen? But 4 years, you can achieve an awful lot. So start thinking about, like, where were you during, each of the Olympics, and look at what's changed, and then try and take that forward. What are you going to be doing during the Rio Olympics, for example?
So you kind of touched on it a little bit before, but you have a book called Business for Authors. Why is it so hard for many new authors to treat their books and their author brand as a business?
I think because the reality is that most authors will never have a business. Most authors have a day job, and most authors have, up until recently, have not been able to make a living from their writing. They've been freelance writers, they've been teachers, they've taught at universities or whatever, or had other jobs. But what's happened in the last few years is it's now possible to make a living from your writing, self-publishing, or as I like to say, indie publishing, or being an indie author. So my aim with this book, Business for Authors, was to try and educate people, because I've worked in massive multinational mining companies, billions and billions of dollars flowing around, and where a product is like coal. But for authors, a product is a book. There's no difference between the business, my business, to a giant mining company, that we all need, you know, customers, we need to pay people, vendors, we need money coming in, we have expenses, we have to do marketing, all these things. So what I wanted to do was kind of try and organize the job of an author if you want to do this full time. And that's the important distinction. A lot of people don't want to do this full time. But if you do, then this is a book that will kind of organize everything. And, you know, even things like thinking about your P&L, your profit and loss statement, which when you run your own business is quite important because otherwise you're not going to get any money. So I do hope that the rise of the kind of entrepreneurial state and the indie mindset, which we're seeing in so many industries, you know, music and even things like cooking, you know, people having these street carts and people buying on Etsy and people buying directly from the artists. I hope that this is the beginning of this kind of renaissance of the author as artist, as, you know, artisan, which I think is a lovely thing.
Yeah. How does an author go from being just an author to being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I definitely think there is a mindset shift. So like we talked about, you have to decide where you want to get to. So for me, it was very much when I decided to write fiction, for example, there are lots of things that I could have written, but I was like, I want to write something that is commercial, stuff that I love. Like I love action adventure, I love explosions and action movies. But I'm not going to write literary fiction, for example. I'm going to write commercial fiction because it's going to sell. So actually having an attitude of what will sell is important. However, not to write to the market, but actually just to be aware of what you love, what other people love. And if you want to make a living from it, you have to understand how the income model works and what expenses you're going to have. And one of the things that annoys me, I think, is people complain about spending money on an editor or a cover designer. If you start any business, you have to invest some money. And for authors, that money is very small, you know, compared to my scuba diving business with a boat and all of that. I mean, it's so cheap being an author. So if you invest in professional editing, professional cover design, a website which, let's face it, with WordPress can basically be free or very cheap, you can start this business and you can take this very seriously. So I think for people to make it as an entrepreneur, you actually have to be thinking about these questions of money, which a lot of authors from the years of traditional publishing and this myth of creativity, you know, being kind of God-given, that has stopped people thinking this way. But I believe that there's a change happening right now.
Is that the reason that you use the term indie publishing instead of self-publishing? Because authors can get in the trap of having to do it all themselves?
I think there's a big distinction. So, for example, I helped my 9-year-old niece self-publish. She truly self-published. She wrote the book, she did the designs, she did the cover, and we put it on blurb.com, which is fantastic for kids, and she sold it and she got some money, which was awesome. She truly self-published. Now, that was never a commercial project. Now, other self-publishing things, you know, maybe like people doing their grandparents' memoir or something, or a family story, or the book that you only have one book in you. Say you have that one book, it's not going to be your business. You're just writing the book because you want to write the book. All of those are good reasons to self-publish. Creative expression is the reason you self-publish. But if you are doing this as a business, I don't like the term self-publishing for if you're doing this professionally. Some people call it professional self-publishing, but I like indie author, independent author, because I don't have a publisher. I'm not beholden to anyone but my readers and my own drive. I have 11 freelancers that I pay on a regular basis. So, you know, I have a business essentially. So yeah, I don't self-publish. And I did design a cover once, and it was blooming awful. So don't do it. And editing, I can't emphasize enough how important editing is for any book.
In talking about being an author, entrepreneur, what are some of the challenges that if somebody's thinking, hey, I want to start writing, they heard of this person, Joanna Penn, and who's been very successful, and they want to walk in your shoes for a little bit. What are some of the challenges that you face as an author entrepreneur?
The challenge that any author faces, which is actually writing. The funny thing is about writing, it's simple, but it's not easy. Like exercise and diet and all of those things, you should be doing. For me, the challenge is, fiction is hard. It's actually really hard to write fiction. It's very rewarding, and I like to measure my life by what I create. That's kind of what I feel is my life now. Is what have I created? But it's very difficult. So that, like I said, that kind of mindset is what I'm tackling. But the only way to do this is to write. I do think that blogging changed my life in that. And I know not everybody needs to blog. It's not necessary. But for me, I had, as of course somebody from 13 years in business, my writing style was very uptight and businesslike and third person, and it had no emotion. I didn't have that ability to relax, and what blogging has done is help me relax my writing style. It's helped me trust people more. Meeting you guys, we've never met before. It's not scary. Readers are not that scary if you write something good, otherwise they'll rip you apart. But it's like blogging helps you find a community, and I'm sure you guys do this too, but often we don't take people seriously unless we can see that they've put some work in online. Like if someone emails you and they don't have an online presence at all, you're like, I'm not even going to answer this, whatever this is, because they haven't put the work in. So, I've been blogging for 6 years now, podcasting for like 4 years, and on Twitter for 5 years. And all of this is a daily practice. It's a daily practice as much as anything else is. So that long-term view is really important. Now, in terms of successful, I don't feel I'm successful yet. My definition of successful is I'm not there. So I have another view of the next few years, which is where I get to where I want to be. But it's funny, like that Jack Canfield book, you do keep moving the goalposts. And I have, mine was, first of all, I'm going to be an author, and then it was like, I'm going to be a full-time author. And now it's like, I have the next goal.
In your book, you mentioned that marketing is important, and we're called book marketing tools, so we definitely agree. What's currently working for you with regards to marketing your fiction books?
Oh, it's a tough one. I mean, I think everyone will say that the only thing that is almost guaranteed to spike sales is an email list, either your own email list, which you've grown by having a sign up like at the back of your book and on your website, so you've grown your own list of readers. That's like really critical. But if you want to spike it even more, then paying for an email blast through a site like BookBub or Free Booksy, or there's loads of them. There's loads of these sites at the moment, but if they have a targeted audience who open emails and buy books, that is probably the main way of spiking your sales. Obviously, we've just had pre-sales open up to indie authors. So I've got my business for authors on pre-sales. First time I've tried it, so it'd be really interesting to see what that does, which changes the spike in a way on some sites. But then for me, like I said about this long-term view, I think it's so important. Everything we do, like this interview, right? And you guys know with podcasting, who knows who's going to look at this interview now, today, or next week, or next month, or next year, or like you just watched that video from 2008. People can find this in years' time, and we will have moved on. Things change. But these little breadcrumbs that we put around the internet, I think are so important for this long-term effect. So that's why I continue to do all this platform stuff, which is more long-term marketing, less spike marketing, but more long-term marketing, and another brick in the wall, another day, and also it's fun, right? So that's why I continue to do it, even though many people would say that to be a lot of the big selling fiction authors don't blog, they just do Facebook or whatever, but I really enjoy doing this, so that's a bit of a complicated answer.
No, I think it's good having that long-term view, because so many people have that spike mentality, and the spikes are nice. It's fun to watch and it's fun to see, but it doesn't sustain. But as you put out those breadcrumbs with that long-term view, I think that's really huge.
And I mean, and for me, this is important too, I have two brands. I have JF Penn, thriller writer, and Joanna Penn, the creative pen, when I'm a speaker as well. So for me, a lot of, I like speaking. I'm off to Stockholm this weekend and then Frankfurt. So I like to travel when I speak and do all this stuff, and the platform stuff gets me speaking engagements, which is part of my income and my business model. So if people do have, and I have some courses and some non-fiction books obviously, so I think when people are thinking about their marketing strategy, it also depends what you're trying to get the customer to do. So like I think in the last 5 years I've pitched like twice for speaking. Generally people find me through my platform and hire me to speak. So that can come from building a platform, but obviously you don't need to do all that unless you actually have something that you want to sell. And if you're only selling fiction, for example, when your books might be like $2 or $5, they're not going to be much more than that. You have to weigh up the effort. So look at your business model, I guess, is what I'm saying.
And how often are you looking at your business model and the changes? I know it might be a concept that most authors are not thinking about their business, their career of a writer as a business. And so how often are you looking at it, evaluating, and are there questions you're asking to determine what the best course is to go down?
Yeah, so I've had a couple of big shifts. Like a couple of years ago when I was writing non-fiction, and I never thought I would write fiction, so I was writing non-fiction and I was doing online courses, multimedia courses, which are very popular amongst the blogging kind of space. That was my business model, and I was speaking. And then as I started to learn about fiction, and I was like, and then I did NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, and I actually found I love this, and now it's really cool. I've switched my business model to trying to phase out the online courses and do more fiction and speaking as more. So that's a change in my business model. So what I've done I actually have a business plan. And I know that's scary for some people, but it doesn't have to be, And I've got a template in that new book, Business for Authors. And I revisit that business plan a couple of times a year. And what I make sure I save a new version every time, because it's so interesting. We all change our minds and then we justify it later we just make some reason up as to why we've done stuff. So what I try and do is say, I'm doing this because of this, because I think this, and then when I look at it another few months later, I can go, well, I thought that's what I thought then, but now I've changed my mind, so I'm gonna, reassess it. So, for example, I get a lot of people pitching me to actually run their book marketing for them, and offering me quite a lot of money to do that, and I don't do that because my goal is, as an author, speaker, entrepreneur, I don't do that for people. So having that kind of strategy and deciding on what you want helps you to say no as well. So when I look at, like my fiction side, I have to decide what my production schedule is going to be for next year. And then, of course, it's about time. So speaking, I get asked to speak a lot, and now I have to say no based on certain criteria. So does it fit with what I want to speak on? For example, like I'm bored of talking about how to self-publish. I think we are beyond that now. I want to talk about creative entrepreneurship. So I'll take those gigs and I'll do Frankfurt and Stockholm, and I'm going to Charleston next year. So these things are interesting, but unless you have a plan and a strategy of what you want to do and what you don't want to do, you just can get blown about by opportunities, which people might not feel they're getting the opportunities yet, but as soon as you get more of a platform and get noticed, the opportunities just kind of come along a lot. It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, really. And are you actually, you said Charleston, are you going to publish?
Yeah, PubSmart. PubSmart.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
We may be there, so it might.
Oh, fantastic! That would be great.
In talking about marketing, backing up a little bit, we're a tools company. You know, we really believe that the author lacks the necessary tools in order for them to effectively market themselves. So when we're thinking about tools, what tools is your team using on a daily, weekly basis to help you sell more books?
It's a tough question. I'm married to a statistician, so he's the numbers guy, and I have said to him, can you please apply yourself to my world so that you can tell me what I should be doing? I am not that interested in data. Like, I'm terrible. I'd much rather be writing something or creating something than looking at graphs. So in terms of tools on that level, I don't really use a particular tool for like data analysis or anything. In terms of bigger tools, I use Scrivener would probably be my number one like writing tool. I'm sure you've heard that before. Couldn't do stuff without Scrivener. And then of course there's all the website-y stuff. Yeah, I mean, what specifically do you mean by tools, I guess? Which area? Because, I mean, I did write a list once on my blog, and it was about 45 different tools overall.
Sure. When I think of tools, I think of something that an author could use in order to save time or money on the process of marketing.
Well, then one of the things that I find really useful is Buffer app, which I use to schedule my social media. Which is brilliant because like Twitter is my main platform, and I'm very active on Twitter. Well, it looks like I'm very active on Twitter because I schedule an awful lot of content through Buffer app. So the smartphone would probably be my other thing. So I just have Feedly on my phone, and if I'm, cooking or whatever, I'll go in and schedule. It's like a couple of clicks to schedule interesting content, and that's become a bit of my brand at The Creative Pen on Twitter, is interesting publishing, marketing, creative entrepreneurship stuff. So yeah, Buffer app for scheduling, because that means I don't have to be there. So for example, the longest I've done is 2 weeks without the internet at all. We cycled through southern India last year and just didn't log on once, but just the other weekend I was in Edinburgh, did 3 days without the internet, but my Twitter and my Facebook was just doing its thing. So Buffer app would probably be a really good thing for social scheduling, so you don't always have to be like logging on and stuff. Cool,
that's great.
Cool. So we've talked about it a little bit, kind of having the long view, and in your book one of the main points was having a strategy. Can you explain why having a strategy is so important and kind of how an author can start to build that strategy?
Yeah, so kind of like I said before, you have to decide what you want to do and what you don't want to do. So very much this author brand thing is important. I think it's important. Some people don't think it's important. But so the reason I separated J.F. Penn for my thrillers out from Joanna Penn is so that if people find, say people look at the Business for Authors book and then they click on my author name on Amazon or Kobo or whatever, they only get the books that are under Joanna Penn. So they get books for authors pretty much. And then self-help books basically. And then under J.F. Penn I have dark thrillers with a supernatural kind of suspense edge. I always find it difficult to explain what I write, but so essentially, but it's dark, and the branding is very different between the two sites. And I think strategy, and I mean, the other thing is it all evolves. So I started out writing fiction under Joanna Penn, and then it was only when I realised that realistically I was looking at two different audiences that I stopped doing that. So I've got these two brands. Now for me, I feel like I serve these two audiences. So my strategy is to serve them. So for Joanna Penn and the Creative Pen, I speak for authors, I write books for authors. Like the next one probably will be around mindset, because I have a graduate degree in psychology as well. So I'm really interested in the mindset side of things. And then JF Penn writes dark thrillers with a supernatural edge. So she doesn't write romance. I'm just not very romantic, to be honest. But so that strategy is really important. So when I'm thinking about what am I going to write next year in 2015, I'm thinking about serving those two audiences. And then you have to look at the amount of time you have. So I know a lot of people are doing co-writing. You guys co-host a podcast. Now I don't anything at the moment because I'm such a control freak. So I'm doing everything myself. So if I need to really be careful with my time. So saying no is a big part of strategy. So I've got a list on my wall of a whole load of books I want to write. Like I really want to write a techno thriller, but I'm wondering how that fits within what I've promised to my audience. A techno thriller with demons, perhaps, maybe. But I guess this is what I'm trying to say is a strategy, is what you want to do and then what you're going to say no to. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. We wanted to be sure we asked this question. We end our interviews in season 2 with this often. Considering everything that you have learned since you started as an author, if you were just starting out today as a new author, what things would you consider most essential?
I think that would depend if it was fiction or non-fiction. If it's non-fiction, then I really would go hard on platform. And at this point, I would probably be doing video or podcasting rather than text-based, although I'd probably do transcripts as well. So I would definitely go hard on platform as a non-fiction author, because generally if you're a non-fiction author, you're also a speaker and you also have other products. For a fiction author, I would go hard on writing a lot of shorter books. Because one, you'll develop your voice faster, and two, you'll be able to get that shelf space much quicker. So I think that's really important. And I think what can happen if you're just starting out with fiction is you think you have to write some massive, massive book, and that takes a lot of work, a lot of editing. It's hard to hold it all in your head. Whereas if you write novellas, which are like shorter books, which are popular right now. Like I wrote one earlier this year, Day of the Vikings. It was so much fun. It's just really, it's a Viking romp, and I blow up the British Museum and all this stuff, and it's really fun. It was relaxing to write. I did it really fast. It's about 28,000 words. Sells well. So I think if I was starting out again as a fiction author, and in fact this is what I'm going to aim to do next year, is write more shorter books.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Joanna, I really appreciate you being on the show, and I know that people are wanting to connect with you, so why don't you tell the folks where they can connect with you?
Sure. So my main site is thecreativepen.com, and that's pen with a double N, and you'll find lots there. My podcast is almost 200 episodes now, so a YouTube channel, as you say, The Creative Pen, and on Twitter @The Creative Pen.
Awesome. Well, RJ, anything before we go?
No, I think it was great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joanna, and I appreciate your time, and we'll see you later.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. That was great.
All right, take care.
Thanks.
Are you confused about what you should be doing to promote your book? Luckily for you, our Ultimate Author Checklist is here to help.
We walk you step by step through building your book marketing engine so you can actively and passively sell more books.
Go to theauthorhangout.com/free guide to get our free Ultimate Author Checklist.